We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. This line was written nearly 2,000 years ago by the philosopher Seneca. It's not a comforting thought. In fact, it's a quiet accusation. It suggests that the greatest source of our anxiety, our dread, and our distress doesn't come from the world, but from the ghost stories we tell ourselves about the world. We tend to think of suffering as something that happens to us, an external event that imposes its will. But Seneca's point is that we are active participants in our own misery. We are the architects of our own anxieties, building elaborate prisons of what if, and then rattling the bars. There is perhaps no greater proof of this than a single evening in American history, October 30th, 1938. The night the Martians invaded, the world was already on edge. The threat of war in Europe was very real. The airwaves were the central nervous system of the nation, the trusted source of breaking news. And on that evening, a young, audacious theater director named Orson Welles decided to adapt H.G. Wells's novel, The War of the Worlds, for his weekly radio drama. But he didn't present it as a play. That was his stroke of genius and, for many, his crime. He structured the broadcast as a series of escalating, realistic news interruptions cutting into a program of ballroom music. First, a bulletin about strange explosions on Mars. Then a report of a meteor landing in Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Then a breathless, on-the-scene reporter describing a metallic cylinder opening, a tentacled creature emerging, and the first horrifying blast of a heat ray. What followed was one of the largest mass delusions in modern history. An estimated 1 million people believed it was real. The suffering that night was not imaginary. The panic was real. People fled their homes with wet towels wrapped around their faces to protect against poison gas. Phone lines were jammed with frantic calls. People reported seeing the flashes of battle in the distant hills. They could smell the gas. They were experiencing the visceral, undeniable terror of the world ending. But there were no Martians. There was no heat ray. There was no poison gas. The entire catastrophe was taking place on a soundstage in a New York radio studio, with actors reading from a script and a sound effects artist creating alien war machines by striking a metal box. The people who fled their homes were not suffering from a Martian invasion. They were suffering from a broadcast. They were suffering from a story they had accepted as truth. Their reality was reshaped, not by an event, but by their belief in an event. The obstacle wasn't an alien tripod, it was their own imagination, weaponized by a convincing narrative. This event is not some quaint, historical curiosity. It is a perfect blueprint of the human mind. It reveals a fundamental truth. The nervous system does not know the difference between a real threat and a vividly imagined one. And we no longer need an Orson Welles to create this effect. We have become our own directors of panic. We sit in a meeting and based on a single comment, we direct a feature-length film in our minds about being fired. We see a news headline and we live through a week of imagined geopolitical collapse. We scroll through social media and experience the full weight of 1,000 lives we aren't living, 1,000 successes we haven't achieved. The suffering is real. The anxiety is real. But the source is often a story. The lesson from that night in 1938 is not that people are gullible, it's that the most powerful cages are the ones we don't see. The challenge, then, is not to build a life free of problems, but to develop the clarity to distinguish between the real and the imagined. It is to notice when you are reacting to the world as it is, and when you are reacting to the ghost story, you are telling yourself about it. Because we still live in a world full of shadows on the wall, and we still have the choice to either run from them in terror, or to turn around and see that they are only being cast by a small fire and a very clever man at a microphone